India has successfully navigated multiple shocks we've seen in the recent past. I don't see any red flags in the near term. India is likely to add about 15 million people to the labor force every year. India has successfully navigated multiple shocks we've seen in the recent past, starting from the pandemic to the war in Ukraine and then the recent tensions in the Gulf. And so, given that, against that backdrop, growth at 6.8% in 2024-25 is a very impressive number, and this is largely led by private consumption and public investment. Now, over the medium term, we have India growing at 6.5%, and beyond this, how do we see the near-term risks? If I were to think about the short-term risks, I would say it's the volatility in the commodity price markets, especially given the recent tensions in the Middle East. What happens if the oil prices go up? So that's a kind of a near-term risks. Beyond that, I would say that effects of climate change, that could be something which is a risk for India in the medium term. Fragmentation, which we've talked about for many countries, again, that's a risk for India and for most of the region for that part. You asked me about red flags. I don't see any red flags in the near term, but I would highlight one important aspect. India is a young, growing population. India is likely to add about 15 million people to the labor force every year. Now, if you want to benefit from this demographic change, you will need lots of reforms. I think in particular, I would emphasize the need for significant investment in education, healthcare, so that this growing labor force can contribute productively to the economy. Also, I would say it's important to make sure that the labor laws which were done so recently are implemented so that the labor markets are more efficient. Going beyond that, India has significant potential, as I mentioned, growth over the medium term is 6.5%. If you want to grow at that rate or even higher, India has to embark on a bunch of reforms. And I think here I would identify two or three, just to give you a flavor of what I'm talking about. One, of course, is the business environment. Even now, when you talk to investors, they talk about red tape, bureaucracy, and so on. I think that needs to be addressed. I think India also needs to liberalize its trade regime, remove trade restrictions so that firms can compete well. You have to make the environment more attractive for FDI. I think that would be important. And I think going beyond that, I think, on some broader issues like improving the quality of data and statistics, I think that would be an important. So these are the kind of reforms, labor market reform, land reforms, agriculture reforms, FDI, business environment. It's a long list, but and a lot of this will require cooperation between center and state, and so everybody needs to come together collectively to make sure that India delivers on its potential.
India has maintained its position as the fastest growing economy in the world, outpacing China. What are your comments on that, and what does it mean for other countries in the neighborhood?
So, just to put things in perspective, China is more than 4 times bigger than India. So in that sense, if India is growing faster today than China, it should not be a surprise. That said, again, as I said, this is something which, the medium-term growth prospects for India are pretty good, 6.5%. It can do better than that, but it all impinges on the reforms India pursues. I've listed a bunch of reforms for you. If you put your hearts and minds together and embark on these reforms in a very conscientious way, then you could get the 6.5% or more over the next, foreseeable, over the next several years.
Now, while the growth in India, like you pointed out, seems to be slightly high, some commentators or critics are observing that the GDP growth may be overstated. Do you agree?
So as we have noted in our Article 4 reports on India, we assess the Indian national account statistics as broadly adequate. However, that said, to the extent that there are concerns about data and so on, I think the Indian government is working actively in trying to fix the quality, in trying to improve. I won't say fix. I'll say improve the quality of statistics, and they are focusing on trying to get better estimates of sectoral PPI data, trying to do surveys of income and expenditure of households and businesses. And I think those are initiatives which will go towards a long way towards addressing these concerns. And think about it, if you're concerned about investment, FDI, and so on, you want to reassure everyone that the statistics are of very high quality. So that's why the improvements that are being worked upon are in the right direction.
You did mention about the public investments and the growth. India's growth post-pandemic has been driven.
Yeah.
India's growth post-pandemic has been driven significantly by public investment rising significantly in the country. Isn't private investment continuing to remain tepid?
So what I would say is the first part of your question is absolutely right. The government has invested a lot in terms of capex spending, addressing the infrastructure needs, whether it's railroads, roads, airports, and so on. And that over the last 20 years, the amount the Indian governments have spent on this has led to a narrowing of the infrastructure gap. So that clearly is a priority. Capex spending has gone up, and one would expect that as you have more of capex spending, you would also crowd in private investment. What we've seen is private investment has risen, but not as much as capex spending for sure, and not as much as one would expect. So you want private investment to increase even faster, to meet the potential, the India's growth potential. And I think that for that to happen, you have to have the kind of reforms which I talked about. But the hope is that going forward, the one good thing about this issue here is, over the last several years, bank balance sheets have been cleaned up and corporates have deleveraged. So in some sense, corporates are now well placed, both in terms of their own investment and in terms of securing financing for the investment. So one would hope that going forward, private investment will pick up at a much faster clip.
Now, last year as well, we've seen the IMF being very appreciative of India's accomplishment when it comes to the digital infrastructure nexus. What does this, what does India's digital infrastructure mean to the world, and what are the learnings here? So,
again, Reena, I think this is a very, very important development in the Indian landscape. DPI is, if I could use the acronym, DPI is, will raise productivity in India, both by fostering innovation and competition. It's going to improve financial inclusion, and very importantly, it will improve the efficiency of the public sector. I think these are factors which are given, and I think it's really impressive. What that has made is that if you think in terms of interacting in the digital economy, this has focused on three things: identity, payments, and data exchange. That's very good. But going beyond that, there are issues of openness and interoperability, so that as many developers as possible can use this functionality provided by DPI. Again, this is an extremely good, what you can call as a very good spillover. But going beyond that, I think what India has done is that it has showcased an example of global technological cooperation. I don't know whether you were here last spring. We showcased India DPI, and the world was watching. And what that does is it basically shows that this is not just a public good; it's a global public good. And by making its experience open to everybody, people are watching to see what are the benefits of this DPI. And in some sense, India has made this almost available to everyone by open standards and open source software. So this is something where India can leverage its technology for a global public good, towards a global public good.
All right. And finally, before you go, the IMF will be releasing a report in Singapore later this month. Could you give us a sneak peek what we can expect out of this report, especially India specific?
So you will see a lot. It will be an expansion of my remarks I made yesterday at the press conference. So we are looking at a more granular level what developments in the global landscape mean for the region, what it means for countries like India, which are, like India and China put together are contributing 60% to global growth. We talk a little bit about the factors driving that. We talk a little bit about the spillovers from China. We talk a little bit about, corporate risks and so on. So it'll be an expansion of what I talked about yesterday. And in the work going forward, Reena, we are doing a lot more work on transformations in Asia from a medium-term perspective. That we will showcase in September during the annual meetings.
Subscribe to Midday India. Get direct notifications on all our videos by clicking on the bell icon.